So we are probably recording. Let me start by going over one piece that I think I thought that explaining. To do this to get my thingy to. Hopefully? No. Okay. And this is related to the assignment, and hopefully it will be a good entry point into some of you guys asking questions about the assignment. Functions and purity and pure functions, right? In math, what is a function? For every input there's an output, right? What else could a function do in math? Could it write to the screen? Could it change files? Could it shoot nuclear missiles? No, right? It just computes a value and it's the output, right? Ideally, most of your functions would be like that. Why? Because that makes your life so much easier when you think about it. You can think of the function in complete isolation, right? I call the function, it doesn't shoot nuclear missiles, right? There are, however, three things that functions that you're calling could do to somehow affect the outside world. And eventually that will be like a list, but I messed up my markdown. They could return a value, right? And that's kind of the best way. They could also, if you pass parameters, and those parameters are objects that have state, they could call methods on those objects, right? And that alters the state of those objects, and so it alters the world, right? There is one more thing that they can do, which is directly access global stuff, right? Create files, write stuff to the screen, send stuff over the network, shoot nuclear missiles, right? That is horrible. Because when you call a function, you're not expecting it to do any of those things, right? If you pass arguments, if you pass parameters, then, okay, it modifies them. That's not that terrible, right? Ideally, you have pure functions, they just compute values, they don't do anything else. Life is good. They return a value, and that's good. If not, well, okay, you pass arguments and then modify them, that's okay. And then, they modify global state, and that's kind of terrible, right? However, your program eventually needs to modify global state, right? That's why you're running it. If you run the program and it doesn't produce any effect whatsoever, would you run it? No. Why, right? I mean, I just wasted time on my computer, right? Just generated heat. It's not a terribly useful thing. So it needs to do something, right? It needs to modify global state. Throughout this class, kind of the only thing that should modify a global state is main. So what main will do is get parameters, right? Get the global state and send it as parameters to other functions. That makes those functions not so terrible. Does that make sense? One important thing that you guys need to realize is where you're getting values from, right? And what should you modify. The way that I make most of the assignments, you're writing functions, right? And those functions have specific inputs and outputs. I got a bunch of questions over the last week where people were, like, for print all operations, they were reading from the keyboard. It's like, no, right? The arguments to print all operations are given as arguments to the functions, and those are the ones that you print. And when you read and write, you should read from out, which is given to you. You should read from input or something like that, which is given to you as a parameter, and you should write to out, something like that, which is given to you as a parameter, not to system.out, and not to system.in, and those kinds of things. Does that make sense? That was a very common issue with assignments. That being said, and this will be throughout, any other questions or issues with assignments? I have been pretty good about answering stuff. Yes, no.
Assignment 3, when I uploaded it and then I tried to recommit and made some changes, it wiped the whole thing.
We need to look at your specific thing. If you want to do it after class, we can do that.
I'll wait till Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. What may have happened is that you committed to a different place or something like that. You can actually look, by the way, and this may not be a bad thing to do. Have you guys realized how cool is Bitbucket?
Pretty cool.
And I wanted to mention one other thing, right? How do you ask for help? If you actually want to get help, right? Well, of course, you ask politely. I'm teaching my kids. You ask politely, right? You say please. But what's the important thing, right? You make it easy for the people who are going to give you help, right? This is so. What do you? And this is something that you guys need to start thinking about it as you're becoming computer geeks, right? Because this is going to be throughout your life. You're going to be bugging your sysadmin to do stuff for you because they don't give you permissions, right? Yes, you're going to be cursing them, but then you're going to be writing an email. You word it politely and you get help, right? So what do you need to give the other person? What's good information to give? I get things like, I tried to submit assignment 1 and I got problems. Is that a good thing? No. What's my answer?
What is the problem?
What's the problem, right? So what do you do, right? How do you ask for help? Well, I tried to do this. I was expecting this, and instead I got this. That's a very easy to solve problem. Well, hopefully. Sometimes, no, you're running some weird operating system and I have no clue how to solve it. But most of the time, if you tell me that, right, I have a chance of giving you a good answer, right? And what's the preferred way of sending me the problem, right? If your problem is with Eclipse or something like that, then a screenshot is okay. If your problem is with code, right, what do you do? Send a pull request on GitHub, right? So I can see the actual code. Because if you just tell me, is odd is not passing the test, right? Or I did everything right, but the tests for main are not passing. I have no clue what you wrote, right? And that makes it really hard. Usually, it just takes 2 tricks, right? Then I send you an email saying, hey, could you please submit your code, or, right? So if you send a pull request, even if it's incomplete, and then an email saying, hey, I'm having trouble with this, right? This is what I expected, it's not happening. Check it on GitHub. That makes my life easier and my chances of helping you easier, right? If you make it easy for me to help you, then chances are that I'll be quicker in helping you. I'll try to help you regardless. Neil, am I okay? Is it okay to go find your Bitbucket and try to find your stuff and show Bitbucket that way? Okay. Do you remember what's this thingy? Your team? The horrible thing in the middle? No?
I can look it up.
We can try to find. We fix your issue and we go track what happened.
It was F7.
The things that I will do to, no. But it's probably 6. Because I sorted it. No, it's not. H. Bitbucket is not unlimited. So I have to make teams of 4 people, because if I make a team of 5, I have to pay. They supposedly give an unlimited one for education, but I bought them, they didn't do it. And it's like, yeah, this is horrible, but. F9. Woohoo! Cool. So, you can see what happened, right? So that may be, oh. You can see recent activity. Maybe what happened is that I merged the assignment 3, but that's 4 days ago. So about a day ago, you sent stuff to
And I don't even think it's like committed.
you committed to the branch, so this is in some branch, right? I don't want to show, but maybe you committed it to master. This will show you your branches. I don't want to show the code because it's his solution. So yes, you probably have an extra commit on A3, right? On the branch A3.
Do I have to push that commit?
You have already committed. What you need to do is to send another pull request. Yeah, I don't want to show his code yet. Hopefully. I will be very strict about the deadline on Wednesday, right? On Wednesday, well, it's actually Tuesday midnight, right? Wednesday at 6:30, I will be showing sample solutions to the assignments and we'll be discussing them, right? Which means after Wednesday at 6:30, I will not take any more submissions for assignments 1 or 2. Does that make sense? I usually, I'm very lenient with kind of every other deadline, but this kind of deadlines I want to maintain because I want to discuss this stuff in class, right? So eventually there is a deadline. Cool. Any other questions about assignments or material from up to here as opposed to the next one? No? Can we go on to the next stuff? Cool. Yeah, I left extra stuff, but that's okay. When you describe processes, right? We have kind of 3 main things. We have sequencing. We say first do this, then do that, right? The other thing is conditions. You say if this happens, then do this, right? If the dough is to runny, then add more flour, right? If you're doing a recipe or something like that, right? Depends on what kind of process do you have. If the widgets are coming out with the wrong color, then go change something, right? Depends on the process that you're doing. If the pages on the printer are coming out wrong, then go change ink on the printer, right? And that's the one that we're going to talk about now. The other one that we'll discuss in a couple of weeks is loops. You say do this and keep doing this while this condition is true or until this happens, right? That kind of stuff. We're going to cover recursion next week, which is actually really, really cool. And you don't need loops after that. But we'll still cover loops. Don't worry. So today we are going to talk about conditionals. And there are 2 kinds of conditionals in Java. You have if statements, which are fairly close to how if statements work in English, except with weird syntax because, well, it's Java, not English. So, in Java, when we want to do if something do something, we write if, the keyword if, then we open a parenthesis, and then we write a condition. What is a condition? is an expression that returns what? That evaluates to what?
True.
True or false. What do we call them in programming?
Booleans.
Booleans, right? We did 700 of them for assignment 1, right? Those are the kinds of things that you write there, right? The parentheses are part of the syntax. You need parentheses. The first one set of parentheses is part of the syntax. If you need more parentheses, you can add more, but those have to be there. Does that make sense? Then you usually open braces. The braces are not part of the syntax, but they almost are. What the braces do is they group the next set of statements. So all those statements belong to the if. If you're guaranteed, if you're really, really sure that you only have one statement, you can leave the braces out. It is very common to, especially for beginner programmers, to leave the braces out, be guaranteed that it's always going to be one statement, and then come back an hour later and add another statement, right? And it's not part of the if, so it's being executed regardless of the if, and 3 days later, you decide that it is a very good idea to always put the braces. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it is a very good idea to think of the braces as part of the syntax. If you have an else, then you can put the else clause, and you put the else keyword, E-L-S-E, and again braces and a bunch of other statements. If you don't have an else, if you don't care about doing anything special for when the condition is not true, then you don't have to put an else. Does that make sense? Any questions? No? An example inside a function. We can write a function called, what's the name of that function? Boolean to yes, no, right? What does it return? A string. And public static is standard noise. And what does it take? A Boolean argument. Is this a pure function?
No. Yes.
Does it modify anything? Right? No. Only thing it does is returns a value. Does it print? No. Right? Who would print? Maybe whoever calls this function will print. But that's the caller's problem, not this function. Does that make sense? Cool. So, and for this one we need an if statement. So if B, right, then return yes, else return no. That B is a Boolean, so it's either true or false. We don't need to do if B equals true, right? Because that's what B is, right? So when you pass a Boolean to that function, it's going to return either yes or no. Does that make sense? Parentheses are required. Braces are not quite required, but it's probably a very good idea to think of them as required. Else clause is not required, so we could actually write this in different ways. Let's go play. Maybe I can get JShell. Not this guy. This guy. This guy. If not, we can use Java repo. Yay! So, of course, that's not going to work. I need to copy it again. I cannot say public static on that piece. So let me eliminate this noise. So what happened is that if I call boolean to just no and I pass it true, it's going to return yes, right? I can write this function without an else. What can I do?
Don't just leave it return. Whatever. Yeah, that's it.
Which one is easier to understand?
The other one.
I find the other one easier to understand, but that's right. That becomes philosophy. The important thing is that it works. Does this idea make sense? Yes.
In Java, can you use more than one else statement?
You can never use more than one else statement.
No, I mean like
In any
else
language.
here.
Yes, those you can. Yes,
That's
we're
what I
going to
mean.
talk about. Yes, you can. Yep.
Maybe switch, right?
There is a switch that we'll cover in a second, but let's talk about combining if statement. The switch statement in Java is almost usable. It's usable, but it's limited. This idea makes sense. Yes? Cool. Simple if statements are simple and easy, right? Another example, abs function, right? Now, the absolute number, right, returns either negative, right, the negative of the number, or it always returns the positive, right, of the positive version of that number. So if you call it with like -7, it's going to return 7, right? So remember that stuff from math? Okay, slightly less common, but also very used in math, is the sine function, right? Sine takes a number and returns -1 if it's a negative number, 0 if it's 0, and 1 if it's positive. And so we could write it like this. Actually, let me do this. Save it somewhere. Because that will make it be pretty. And we can talk about it, right? Is it easier to read? Or is it easier to read on white? Either way? Cool. We are going to check first, right? Is the number 0, right? If it is, we return -1. Else, we open braces, and then inside we put another if, right? So if it wasn't less than 0, we check again. If it was greater than 0, then we return 1. Otherwise, we return 0. Does this make sense? We can nest to any level we need to. I tend to be incredibly picky about indentation. In fact, to me, it's kind of a standard. If it's not indented right, I know that it's wrong. So. And you always do one level of indentation, right, after you open a brace. Now, could we write this different? Well, this is a nested if. Where is the nested if? Where is the nesting? This guy, right?
So there's another statement in the else.
There is an if statement inside one of the branches of the if statement, right? That's nesting, like Russian dolls, right? Can we write this different ways? Could we reorder that thing? We could actually do less than or equal to 0, right? and then we put here we could nest it the other way, right? Else what would go here?
0.
And then here we would just do right? You can write them many different ways, right? Because you have more things. Does that idea make sense? It's still nesting. We are nesting this stuff, right? Let me undo all my changes. Not those. Oh yeah, me too. No. Okay. We can also write something that this makes it look like the nested conditions are kind of go after or something like that, right? Makes it look like less than 0 is somewhat more important because you ask for it first, right? Actually, there's no particular reason to do it that way, right? We could have sorted them anyway, right? And so another way of writing this exact same thing, right, is eliminate these braces. Oops, sorry. Which I told you not to do, right? But what this allows us to do, and it works because this whole thing is one statement, right? Does this idea make sense? You can see the transformation. So what this allows me to do is to write it like this. Does this make sense? It is the exact same thing. I just changed how to indent, right? I eliminated the braces, but
Does it make a difference?
none whatsoever to the computer. For the computer, it is exactly the same thing. I guess you eliminated 2 braces, so it leaves 2 less characters. But other than that, the syntax tree that the computer looks at is exactly the same. For you, it is different because it looks different. Does that make sense? We tend to call this chained if statements. And this is common when your decisions are not really binary, right? When you have more than 2 options. We tend to write it like this, right? Because this doesn't make the first one look any different than the next ones. Does that idea make sense? It's just how you format it, right? But it kind of changes how you think about it. A couple of languages have an else-if as a specific keyword. Java and most C languages don't, because it's the same thing. You're really changing it, but you don't have to see it as changing. Oh, sorry, you're really nesting them, but you don't have to see it as nesting. You see them as chaining it, right? Does that idea make sense? That is all there is to know about if statements. Ooh, so now let's do a 700 complicated examples, right? Actually, let's actually first run this one. Yeah. Maybe we should be using Eclipse, but I feel terrible about doing that for simple things. Yay! It sort of kind of works, right? So let's do more examples. We have talked about chained if statements. Oh, actually, there is one more thing to know about if statements. If you have used Excel or SQL or Scheme or List, now, if statements are weird in Java, right? Most of the stuff we have evaluates to a value, right? If statements don't. If statements just take, they are separate, they don't evaluate to anything, right? We have the ternary operator, the question mark operator, that actually is an operator that operates on a Boolean and two things and evaluates to either the first one or the second one, depending on the Boolean. Does that make sense? So I can do true question mark 1 colon 2. What is this expression going to evaluate to?
1.
And I can do false, falsy, question mark 1 or 2, and this is going to evaluate to 2, right? Does this make sense? This is an operator like plus or minus. It's just a really weird one because plus and minus take two things. And those are the ones that we use more commonly. Do you need to ever use this thing? No, if you don't like it, no, you can write an if statement, right? But you probably need to learn to read it because other people may use it, right? Does that idea make sense? So actually we could have written, let's calculate sine, right? How could we do it as an expression? We have a number, right? So we're going to return, if the number says less than 0, what are we going to return? Sorry, question mark. What do we return? Minus 1, right? Otherwise, what do we return? Well, either 0 or 1, so I need to check again, right? If n equal to 0, if it is, return 0, otherwise I return 1. Oops, no, what happened? Sign 2 of minus 1, oh, return minus 1, never mind, I cannot read. Achieve the same thing. Which one is shorter? This one, so of course this one's better, right? I get carpal tunnel syndrome a year later, that's good, right? Maybe. Which one do you understand better? Which one do you like better? It's a matter of style, they're both equally okay, right? Just know that this thing exists. The if statement is more general, but this is fairly useful in many cases. I tend to use these things a lot because I learned in C and in the C community, this is normal. You nest it to 7 levels, and you think that whoever cannot decode those things doesn't know how to program. It's not true, but you become older and wiser, and you decide that no, on Monday mornings, no, you may not want to write those things. But
on complex code, this one runs faster, right?
not at all. There is no reason whatsoever why one would run faster than the other. Maybe, maybe not. I have no clue. Depends on what the compiler does.
Because this does that thing that when the first one evaluates true, it skips the second one.
The same thing with an if statement. The second piece doesn't get done, right?
Okay.
Your compiler determines which one runs faster. Anybody, it may happen that on an ARM7 using GCC 2.7, this runs faster than the other one because the ARM has an instruction that maps this or something like that. But there's no theoretically always true answer to which one runs faster.
Okay.
Depends on your compiler. I have no clue in practice, maybe. Chances are that 99% of you would never be in a situation where the difference between this one and the other matters. Sometimes it matters, and then you learn, but it's always you learn about your particular microcontroller or whatever the heck you're programming.
Okay.
Usually you go with whatever is easier to understand, because right is better than fast, normally. And you guys are going to be a heck of a lot more expensive than computers. When you're costing the company $100 an hour, which is normal, a week of your salary pays for a decent server. So. And then eventually, no, that's not true, because then 10,000 AWS instances are a lot more than what you make in a week, right? But so it's always a balancing act. But usually, programming time is a heck of a lot more expensive. Your brain is a heck of a lot more, a more expensive, more important resource than the computer. And now I'm gonna make you guys all employable by teaching you FizzBuzz. Now, eventually people run interviews, right, to see whether you guys can program or not. And 10 years ago, somebody said, "Oh, sometimes credentials are so terrible that you get people who come out from supposedly with a CS degree who cannot answer simple questions like this one." And so every freaking interviewer actually asked these questions, right? The point wasn't to ask this question, but to make sure that you can program before you go interview. And the point that person was making is sometimes people you get even with a degree or with a piece of paper don't actually know even basic programming. And so this is kind of a standard joke now in our community. But it's actually a cool program. I have to confess, I learned it as a drinking game. And they had sevens, which made it more complicated. But the idea is you're counting, and if the number is divisible by 3, instead of saying the number, you say fizz. The number is divisible by 5, instead of saying the number, you say buzz. If the number is divisible by both 3 and 5, you say FizzBuzz. And if you lose, you have to drink something. Now, so let's do it. Start counting.
1, 2.
Buzz.
Yeah? Fizz? Yeah, fizz. Because it's divisible by 3, right? You get the idea?
Yeah.
Cool. So now let's program it. Somebody's remembering the drinking games. Oh, you haven't seen it before?
Never
No.
heard of this before, no.
I've seen variations of this.
Hilarious.
Yeah. And so, of course, since we know how to do functions, right? What we would do is write a function that, given a number, would return the right thing. Either the number as a string, or fizz, or buzz, or FizzBuzz. Does that make sense? There's different ways of writing it. This is one, right? So we can check, okay. And with nesting, if the number is divisible by 3, right? We check if it's divisible by 5. Then we return FizzBuzz, else we return fizz. And if it wasn't divisible by 3, we check, is it divisible by 5? If it is, we return bus, and if not, we convert that int to a string. So an easy way to do it is to concatenate it with the empty string. Does this make sense? We can also do it chaining. So if it's divisible by 3 and by 5, then return fifth bus. Else, if it's divisible by 3, return fifth. Else, if it's divisible by 5, return bus. Right? We know that it wasn't divisible by both of them. And else, return that conversion.
Nothing to do with question marks.
Sorry?
Nothing to do with question marks.
Let's do it with question mark. Why not? Sure, why not? How do we do? Return what? Actually, let me do one thing that I need to do. Is divisible. Is div. So how do we know if a number n is divisible by another number div? N percent div equals 0. Yeah, that was driving me down, right? We should define functions that do the right things. So now we can use that here, right? If is div, how do we want to start? Which one do we want to do first? Fifth, so 3. If it's divisible by 3, right? And 3. What are we going to return? If it's divisible by 5, then return fifth bus. If it was divisible by 3 but not by 5, what do we return? And otherwise, so we know that it's not divisible by 3, right? What do we return? If it was divisible by 5, we return bus. Otherwise, return. Yeah, we need to make it into a string. So with some luck, we actually coded things right. So we can try fifth bus 3, we get fifth, 4, 4. It seems to work, right? How do we test it? We run it for every possible number. Oops, no, never mind. But does this make sense? Can you guys do ifs? Reasonably okay. Maybe. I'm gonna skip this because I want to talk about switches, but read this. It's the example with max. So getting the largest of several numbers. So there's another example. And there's some exercises for you to play with. By the way, have you guys got to coding bat? For 1 second, let me just show you this stuff. I thought I showed it, but maybe I didn't. This is where I got flip in. the cool thing is that you have it on the browser, and it runs all test cases and tells you if you did right or wrong. You can do more exercises. Again, if you have 5 minutes, right, and you're on a computer that may not have everything installed, you can come and play with this stuff. If you haven't done much programming, you need to do 1,000,000 exercises. The assignments may not be enough, so come and do another 20, right? Just like when you're learning baseball, you need to try 700 bats, and when you're learning to pitch, you need to pitch 1,000,000 things, right? It's just what you have to do, right? So it is good for practice. It's codingbat.com. So let me talk about the switch statement, which is a slightly different syntax for doing kind of chained if statements. When you want to do something based on an expression, you have more than 2 options, right? You can write something like this. You do switch, you put parentheses, you put the expression that you want. And then you do case statements. Case, and you put a specific value, a colon, right? And what happens? You could have fall true. So if it's either value 1 or value 2, then it's going to do these things. And break means get out of this switch statement. And in this other case, it will do something else, right? So for something like the day of the week, you're given the day, and we decide that we're going to do 1 to 7, right? And 1 is Sunday. So we'll write it like that. Switch day, which is an int, and we have case 1, return Sunday, then 2, return Monday, and we have a default, which is if none of the above actually works. And this will come and evaluate one by one. Since we are returning, we don't need breaks. If you're doing something other than returning, then you need to put breaks. If not, it will continue doing this stuff below. Does that make sense? How else could you do this if you didn't have a switch statement? An if statement, right? And a bunch of if, else if, else if, else if, else if, right? This just looks prettier. Does that idea make sense? Mm-hmm. Again, is it terribly useful? Yes and no. If you want to reduce cognitive load, just learn how to do ifs, right? But many times this will look prettier. As a slightly more complicated one, you can get how many days are in a month, assuming that it's not leap, right? We have all of those months, and assuming that 1 is January rather than 0, right? If it's 1 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, return 31. If it's 2, return 28, and 4, 6, 9, and 11, return 30. And we could have used the default, but I decided to put it outside and turn something else. Does this make sense? Cool. You know how to do if statements and switch statements. You are well on your way to becoming programmers. 2 more weeks. We'll do recursion next week and loops. And then that's it, you're done. Yes? Yes and no. Don't worry, we'll keep complicating it forever. And then after we are done with this class, you go to data structures and we complicate it some more just for fun. But after that one, you will be programmers. Any questions on if or switch statements? No? Yes?
What is the colon thing again?
This column?
Question marks for the ifs.
Oh,
shorter version. So
when you're doing the question mark operator, the colon divides. So you're doing true question mark 1 colon 2.
okay.
So that's how you. It's a ternary operator. It takes three things: a Boolean expression, and then two values that have to be of the same type, not necessarily Boolean.
Okay, so does it divide 1 by 2, or does it just look for 1 or 2?
It does either one or two.
Either 1 or 2. Okay.
So it will evaluate the first thing, and if it's true, it will return the first one. If not, it will return the second one.
Okay.
So this will return which one? Or will evaluate.
Well,
Will yield to 1, and if we do this, will yield what?
2.
Yep. What happens if we do this? Oops. What would this yield? Compiler error. Oh! The compiler is too nice. The compiler will actually complain if JShell is nice and it's not doing typing. In Eclipse, this would give you an error because it cannot type that expression. Does that make sense? You don't know if it's an int or a string, so.
Okay, and then just the question mark is just applying the first statement to the other two. Right.
The operator takes three things. It's just syntax, right? Just like, what does the plus do? Well, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. It's just how the syntax that they came up with this. If you've ever done Excel, there is an maybe IIF function that does this, which is fairly useful. Since we have time, we do, right? For about 10 minutes. So we can actually go back and do this example for math. Actually, let's do it like this. You guys write a function. Take a piece of paper or a computer and write a function that will return the biggest one of two elements. It's a function, it's called math2, and it would return the biggest one. It takes two arguments, let's say n1 and n2, and returns the bigger one of those two. How do we want to do it? With an if or with a question mark?
Like to do it.
Let's do it first with an if. What's our condition?
N1 greater than N2.
So if n1 is greater than n2, what do we return? Else,
N2.
what happens if they are equal?
Return N2. Doesn't matter.
We are returning n2. Why? It doesn't matter, right? They're equal. Who cares? A 4 is equal to any other 4. We could have written greater than or equal. Right? This makes sense. Yes? Cool. Now let's try max 3. If you're listening to this online, where is your piece of paper and pen? Did you guys use chained if statements or nested if statements? Nested? Anybody use chained? No. And let's do it with chain statements first. How do you know if you did it right? When you get home, type it in Eclipse and see what happens. Right? They're computers. They'll do it for you. Isn't that cool? Go to Java REPL and type it. right? N1 greater than or equal to N2, and N1. Actually, when you get home, type it and test it, because it's fairly common to not do the greater than or equal, just do greater than, and then mess it up. Because when they're all equal, you may not be returning the right things. Actually, when two of them are equal, you may not be returning the right thing. But if we do this, if it's greater than or equal to N2 and N3, then which one won? This would be one way to do it, to chain if statements. But actually, here's the right way to do it. Always cheat, always be lazy. You are programmers, you're supposed to be lazy. The right kind of lazy, right? As programmers, this is what we do all the time. We are building abstractions. We are building tools that will make our final problem incredibly easy. Ideally, this doesn't always happen, and there is all sorts of things, right? But ideally, your main should be incredibly simple, right? When you look at it, it should be like, oh, duh, it's obviously correct, right? Doesn't always happen. When you start doing complicated stuff, it's not true. But, right, that's kind of the ideal state. That you build the right abstractions so that the code is obviously correct and easy to understand. So always be on the lookout for, can I make it easy, right? Can I build something simple that will make my life easier, right? Cool. Any questions on if statements, switch statements, the meaning of life? No? Cool. Then I guess I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Reminder, hard deadline. If your assignment is not submitted by then it never happened. And you will get a 0. So make sure that you submit by Wednesday. Sorry? Yes, we will talk about the assignments, and then you can also get ahead on assignment 3. It's probably going to be about half and half. About half the time will probably be lecture to the lecture as we talk about the assignments. Stop, you thinking, what? Yes.
You wrote me comment that these add just the Java file. I don't know how to.
Okay, one sec. I'm trying to see why didn't this thing started. What happened? We didn't record this thing. One sec. Oh well. Okay, sorry.
How I can not send the Java files to the webcast? How can I
Add
get
only the Java file. When you do git add, just do git add and include the name of that Java file. If you do git add dot, it adds every file.
everything? Oh, that's what I was doing. Thank you so much.
Sure.